So we're recording this, and my musical colleague and friend says, please don't cough. No coughing. If you are following this on an audio track or on YouTube, I recommend getting the sources to hand. You can see them online at www.tinyurl.com/NLS Women Torah. So tinyurl.com/NLS Women Torah, and you'll be able to kind of follow along much more clearly, I think, if you've got the if you have the texts with you. Does everyone have? Good. So what I thought I would do to start, apart from Stephen, sorry, here we go, that's yours. What I thought to do to start off with is just work out what Torah reading is. And the earliest mention of anything like Torah reading is this verse in Deuteronomy, which says this, and this, by the way, would happen once every 7 years. Gather the people, it's called hakel, from that word gather, men, women, children, and the strangers in your communities, that they may hear and so learn to revere the Lord your God and to observe faithfully every word of this teaching. So what the rabbis understand by this is that every 7 years, everybody who was to have a relationship with Torah would come together to hear the Torah. Couple of interesting things about that as this changes into what we now do, which we'll see in just a few seconds, which is not once every 7 years. And by the way, this was probably the whole thing, or certainly a much larger chunk than we would do on a weekly basis. But a couple of things that are interesting for me looking at this. One is, who is gathered? Right. Men, women, and children, and by the way, the non-Jew. So when you see in the Torah the word ger, which we would sometimes translate today as a convert, but is translated here as a stranger. A ger is somebody who comes to live in Israel, under a kind of an Israelite jurisdiction without personally becoming Jewish themselves. So that's where you are when you're in the Torah. By the time you come to the earliest sort of slice of rabbinic Judaism, so this is somewhere between the year, I'm going to say after 70, after the destruction of the temple, but before the conclusion of this sort of early tranche, you get a text called the Tosefta. So in the Tosefta you get this. On Yom Tov 5, on Yom Kippurim 6, and on Shabbat 7. What's that a reference to? Number of aliyot. Right? Or incidentally, you can even unpack that a little further. 4 on Rosh Chodesh, 3 on a weekday or Saturday afternoon. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I just sort of put that in there so that we can now understand this, where it says, everyone goes up to make the minyan of 7. What's the minyan of 7? Aliyah. Right, the people who get an aliyah, even a child, even a woman. And then it says in the Tosefta, don't bring a woman to read before the masses. So this is the earliest articulation of the position of women as one of the people who are called up to the Torah. And it's very odd. It's very odd because even though the woman is not brought up to read before the masses, Rabbim is the word that's used, nonetheless it says, Kol olim b'minyan shiva. Everyone goes up into this quorum of 7. So there seems to be some kind of tension there and some kind of lack of clarity, which we will do something maybe to understand before we're done. Let's try and get into this now. So that the next text comes from one of the most important. They're called Rishonim, early halachic people who are working with the Talmud, trying to sort the Talmud into some kind of more accessible order. And pretty well everybody, other than one person that I'll mention, is entirely pre any kind of Reform, Conservative, Orthodox split. They're all sort of mainstream rabbinic leaders, and pretty well everybody is old. I haven't looked up the Rosh's dates, but it's before the Shulchan Aruch. So what the Rosh says is the fact that a minor and a slave and a woman who are not obligated in Torah study are included in the quorum of 7 who receive aliyot to the Torah on Shabbat is because the Sefer Torah is there for the purpose of being heard. Okay, so there's a couple of jumps in there. You will sometimes hear this idea, and we'll see it. Actually, it's number 7, text number 7. You'll see it there. That there is this sort of operating principle that if you're not obligated in a thing, you can't exempt other people from it. It's quite a well-known idea. For example, if I have an obligation to make a hamotzi before I eat, and I want to exempt everybody else from having to do that hamotzi themselves, I make the blessing for hamotzi, and nobody else needs to make the blessing for hamotzi. They are all liberated from that obligation by my fulfilling it. If, however, I don't have an obligation to do something, and a lot of issues around the role of women fall into this kind of category, then if the woman does the thing, she can't exempt other people from that obligation. So a classic example would be, I was going to say putting on tzitzit, or say the blessing before you put on tzitzit. Actually, which we do on Kol Nidre. Right? I am obligated. I say the blessing. Everybody is kind of, Yotzei is freed up from their obligation at that point. But if a woman who is not obligated to do that blessing does it, she can't free other people from the obligation. So what the Rosh is saying is that don't get carried away by that, because that might apply if the purpose of Torah reading was Torah study. If the purpose of Torah reading is that people should fulfill their obligation to study Torah, then a woman couldn't be part of this original quorum. But it's not. The purpose of Torah reading is so that everybody should hear the Torah. It's about making the Torah heard within a community. And in that, women and men, as we'll see, are equally obligated. Where do you think the idea that women and men are equally obligated in hearing the Torah might possibly come from? As a halachic idea? The first text. Right, from Hakel. That when the Torah was read publicly, men and women were obligated to hear it equally. So, what we've got from this is that the role of reading the Torah is so that the Torah should be heard. And that is an obligation which manifests for both women and men sort of equally. Well, it's not quite an obligation. It's just making it sort of heard. So we're back up in 3. And the blessing is not said in vain. If women make a blessing, it's not a blessing that's said in vain. We have this idea that you shouldn't make a blessing in vain. You shouldn't take God's name in vain. It's called a bracha levatala. For women don't bless, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us in the words of Torah, which is a blessing you say when you study Torah, which we can get into exactly this at another time. The Rosh is imagining that women are not obligated to say, but men are obligated to say. But that's not it. The blessing that you say when you have an aliyah is Asher b'chabanu v'natan lanu, who has chosen us and given us the Torah. So what he's saying is that the reason why women are in is because they get the Torah. Do you see that? I think that's actually quite important. What this is saying is that the covenant, the brit of the gift of Torah from God is a gift to men and women equally, which is why in Hakel you need the men and the women there to hear it, which is why women get included in, and we'll come to when they get taken out, but it's why women get included in the original bit where it says everybody goes up to make this minyan of Shiva, this quorum of 7, even minus even women, because the Torah is a gift to people, and the people that you call up are people who have that covenantal relationship with Torah. Daniel.
First, are we making a distinction between doing an aliyah and saying a blessing over the parasha, and actually doing the laning?
Brilliant question, which I answer in texts 4, 5 and 6.
Just sort of a question. We're talking about the quorum of 7, the obligation to hear it. But doesn't aliyah, or does it originally mean that you read it? Or you call that to hear it? So the question, which is, what's the relationship between having an aliyah and reading from the Torah? I promise I'm literally just about to get to. Okay, let's get to it.
Right? So, that's what Torah reading is. That's how it used to work in the time of the Torah itself, of the Bible itself. That's how it worked in this sort of very, very early time of the early rabbinic period. And the Rosh thinks that it's about not fulfilling an obligation, but instead it's about the people who have the Torah hearing the Torah. So I'm going to park the whole issue of women and Aliyah for the next 3 texts and look at this, because I think this is it's a really interesting test case that I think will kind of help us deal with change, and also help us deal with dignity and how do we treat people, and how does the halachic system work. And I'm going to use this precise thing that both Daniel and Ed were just asking me about, which is what's the whole business about having someone reading the Torah and having someone have an aliyah. Okay. This again is from the Tosefta, so this is again very, very, very old rabbinics, text number 4. In a synagogue which has only one person who can read, that person stands and reads and sits, and stands and reads and sits, even 7 times. Can anyone explain what that text what the reality is that text is trying to explain?
That you still read the Torah, even if you're on your own.
No. It's not saying that. If you are on your own, you do not read the Torah. The Torah is one of the things that you need 10 people around so that you can do.
That the Torah must be read in public. If there's only one person who can read it, that person has to take all 7 turns.
All 7 aliyot?
Yes.
Right, that's the key thing. Do you see that in the time of the Tosefta, from after the destruction of the temple until round about the year 200, you get called up to the Torah and you read your own aliyah. Actually, you didn't even say a bracha. The first person up would say the opening bracha and lay the Kohen and lay their own bit, and then everybody else, and the 7th person up would, and then say the one blessing at the end. So you didn't have what we had now, no Lester. You were on your own. And if you've got 10 people around and none of them are expert in reading the Torah, one person takes all 7 aliyot, because you don't call someone up to read from the Torah if they can't read from the Torah. Why not? It would embarrass
the person who can't read.
Would embarrass the person who can't read. Who else is it also a ganai? It's a ganai to the congregation and the Torah, and thereby, he says, pointing where God lives. It's not, but you know what I mean, right?
Exactly where God lives.
It's in my office. Sorry, no. Right? So you can see that as Torah reading becomes a thing in the earliest part of Rabbinic Judaism, as it becomes a thing, you don't mess it up. And if you can't read Torah, you don't get an aliyah. And I think they are partly worried about embarrassing people, but they're principally worried about shaming the Torah itself and thereby God. You don't, right? So this is radically different from what we do today. So now let's move forward to the Shulchan Aruch, 17th century, and the major statement of Judaism. We're doing a 1500-year leap from where we were as Torah reading first started to where we are now in text 5. And this is what Joseph Kara says. When one who doesn't know how to read, one needs to protest against them, so they don't go up to read from the Sefer Torah. If you've got someone who's not good enough, don't have them busk it along. Don't have them being, with things being whispered in their ear that they can, sometimes cope with and sometimes not. If you make a mistake, get out of there and don't come back until you're properly prepared, right? I mean, because it's the Torah. And if you need someone who doesn't know how to read, when would you need someone who doesn't know how to read? For example, you've got a Kohen or a Levi. Yeah, you've got 8 people, 1 Kohen and 1 Levi there. They can't step outside, as David sometimes does. Not for this reason, but they can't escape. You need them, and there is nobody else save him. If when the reader reads for him word after word, he knows how to repeat it and read from the written text. Very interesting. He can go up, and if not, he should not go up. Doesn't tell you what you do in the situation, right? It's a bit of a problem. But can you see the reality that's there? By the way, all of a sudden, did you notice who else joined this little puddle of people around the Torah? The reader, right? The hakoreh. Right? So it's very interesting that by the time of the Shulchan Aruch, by the way, is Sepharad, and traditionally the Sephardim would be much better Torah readers than the Ashkenazim for various reasons. Right? The Sephardim are still being strict about who gets an aliyah. But Joseph Caro knows of the reader. So you feel that there's something is around about this time. You can feel that there's somebody who's up there who does know how to do it, a kind of a Lester type figure, and they're kind of there to help out other people. And the Rosh is before the Shulchan Aruch, but Ashkenaz. But the Rosh, and Joseph Caro doesn't rely on the Rosh on this particular occasion, which is quite rare. But what the Rosh says is the thing we do now where the Shliach Tzibor reads, this is not to embarrass people who can't read. Somebody, I think Liz, Elizabeth, that's the point that you were making. If someone's daughter is just getting married, you'll take an aliyah. But if you can't read, what do? And you actually end up, by the time that you get to 1985, for example, at New London Synagogue, Rabbi Louis Jacobs was not allowing bar mitzvah boys to do more than Mafteh Haftorah and one other aliyah, because if they were perceived to be doing more than that, it might embarrass people who were not capable of doing that, and Rabbi Jacobs was exceedingly rigorous on not embarrassing people. Right? He was very makpid, he was very strict on that. So the consequence of him being strict on that was that he was that he kind of wouldn't allow people who could have done much more do much more. He was also very strict on not letting anybody read from the Torah unless they were properly prepared. Wasn't prepared to have that. But can you see over that sort of 1700-year historical leap that we just did in the last 5 minutes, that the process of reading the Torah in public in a synagogue involves balancing of competing factors? And this is the key point I want to make. That you've got the dignity of the Torah. Is the Torah important? Yes. The Torah is the refraction of God's will for Jewish people. And you have the dignity of human beings. Are human beings important? Yes. Human beings are created in the image of God. We're the refraction of the divine will also. And that somehow those two things are in competition with one another. And I think one of the key things to sort of see is the way in which historical change and sociological reality is shifting Jewish practice within the mainstream. I'm not making a point about reform, conservative, orthodox, consorti, none of that. The way that Torah reading evolves and changes is precisely based on who around can read. Are you in a society where you've got loads of people who are expert Torah readers, or are you in somewhere sort of more Ashkenazi where you haven't really got expert Torah readers, and what can you possibly do? How do you balance up these sorts of competing pieces? That's the reason why I wanted to sort of check into this story of the Bal Koreh, the Torah reader, because I think it helps us understand that halacha changes and evolves and develops in general. It is driven by feelings about honour due to X or honour due to Y, when you can't have both. There's a necessary trade-off. You can either have it done well or you can involve lots of people. You can't do both at the same time. And also that the way in which it changes is shaped and in some ways driven by the historical, sociological, economic background of the society in which you find yourself. Any questions about that little sort of bit?
Yeah.
All right, moving on.
This is all post the synagogue.
Correct, this is all post-temple, right? The temple's long gone. So the temple is destroyed. I mean, there's a huge shift, because it goes from the priests to the rabbis. So there's an enormous shift, and it goes from centralized to diffuse. But this is all post-temple. So text number 7. When I was talking about the Tosefta, and we've had the Tosefta in texts 2 and 4, the Tosefta is not quite mainstream. It's I don't know how you would sort of give an analogy for it. It's a bit like if you wanted to explain to someone how to play well in the Premier League, you would show them some sort of Bundesliga. it's just sort of slightly off the beaten track. Not bad, and you can certainly learn a lot from it, and actually bits from there make their way into the sort of the centre. But the centre is the Mishnah and the Gemara. So let's have a look at the Mishnah, and the Mishnah will say something fairly similar to the Tosefta. The Mishnah says... Oh, sorry, we've done that. I didn't mean 7. Oh, sorry, I've confused myself. I'm on. Let me skip down to 9, which actually means over the page. So this is what you see in the Talmud, which is a version of what we had in the Tosefta, but it's now in the Talmud. This is called a Breita, which means that it's early. It is pre-200. And we can tell that because it's in the Hebrew. Stuff that's post-200 tends to be in Aramaic. And also that it opens with a particular introduction. Whenever you see this sort of Hebrew phrase, I think there's some at the door. Tanu Rabbanan, our teachers taught, it means this is really old. So this is what we're finding in the Talmud. It's similar to the Tosefta. All go up to make up the quorum of 7, even a minor and even a woman. Well, that's exactly the same as we had in the Tosefta, those of us who are checking aside. But the wise said, V'chachamim omrim, was I wrong? Sorry if I correct you. Number 9. Don't call a woman to read from the Torah. Mipnei kavod hatzibur. So now we are meeting the single sort of mainstream, clearest and most important phrase. If you're going to get 2 words of Hebrew out of this entire evening, kavod hatzibur. So the grammar first. This is genitive. The X of the Y. Kavod literally means weight. So if you think of honour as sort of scales, you're told to honour your father and your mother. They gave birth to you. How do you rebalance that scale? Pretty tough work, right? So here you have the honour of the tzibur, of the community. And this is going to be our challenge for the remainder of the time that I'm presenting tonight. What do we do with this kavod tzibur? What does it mean?
Is this the first reference?
What I've got in I'm really pleased with this because I'm getting questions to which the answer is the next text. So the next 1, 2, 3, 4 texts are the 4 other appearances of the phrase kavod tzibur in mainstream rabbinic in the rabbinic period. So you will know every single example of kavod tzibur before we're done.
Does it explain why does it affect the honour of the congregation?
Good. And the Bach is going to. We will absolutely get to that. Right? What does it mean? I mean, this is very, very typical of studying the Talmud, which is that it uses all these sorts of phrases on the assumption you know precisely what that phrase means. But it's very difficult sometimes to know precisely what that phrase means. So you could look to a Rashi, you can look to various different Rishonim, you can look to its appearances across the Talmud. Here's going to be the single key question for me in terms of my relationship with kavod tzibur on this example, which is, if the text says don't do it because of kavod tzibur, does that mean that I measure the impact on the honour that would be due to a community if a woman did, and if I find that it is now 0 in the 21st century, it no longer applies? Or if it says don't do it because of kavod tzibur, it means don't do it. Don't do it. It tells you not to do it, and kavod tzibur might have just as easily have said the blue-blee of the blue-blue. It's just like don't do it, stop. Can you get engaged in that sociological investigation? That's going to be a key question for me. But let's do what Roberta's asked us to first, because that's what I thought we should do next. So, what I'm doing now in 10, 11, 12 and 13 is looking at the other appearances of kavod tzibur in the Talmud. First question, first example. Why is someone dressed in rags not allowed to read from the Torah? You don't call someone who's dressed in rags up to read from the Torah. Interesting questions about whether or not you can get an aliyah if you're wearing jeans, if you've got the thing, all these kinds of questions are all to play from. But you don't mipnei kavod tzibur. You don't call someone to read from the Torah wearing rags because it is an affront to the honour of the community. Incidentally, who has the obligation to clothe someone who's dressed in rags? The community, right? Someone turns up in shawl and rags, you get the clothes for them. You don't go, oh, we're not having you. Any reflections? Oh, let's do certainly the next two. The last one is a bit more difficult.
I'm using this in the context of women. Suggests that if a woman can't be called Mipnei Kavod Tzibor, it's because it is as though she is ragged.
Right. Well, I mean, let's.
If you're juxtaposing those two, Jeremy, you're suggesting that a woman is in some sense slovenly or ragged or.
I don't think that would be okay, but only if you'll allow me to do the same thing with the next three, and by I've done the thing with the next three, you'll realise that kind of analogy is not what's going on.
So what are the rags doing here then?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily that the woman is slovenly, but that. Let me do that, and I will come back. I promise an answer for that, but I don't want to quite do it yet. Let's just stretch our understanding of this term kavod tzibor. The next one is, it says that the shliach tzibor, and here I would encourage you to think not of the cantor, but of the sort of, the shamash, the sort of the Ian or the Ed figure, or the, is not allowed to take the dressings off the ark in front of the community because of the honour of the community. This is technical. It used to be that for certain services, Shmini Atzeret and Shavuot, you would put greenery around the ark. Harvest festivals. And you don't stop the service to take the greenery down and then carry on the service. You wait until the service is finished and then you take the greenery down when you are not having everybody waiting for you to do that.
In Notting Hill, in the Federation, before Simchat Torah, we used to change the curtain and all the
dressings.
Torah mantles from the white of the...
How interesting.
And we used to put on the coloured ones before Simchat Torah.
How interesting. And I'm sure what they didn't do... Right. What they didn't do is get up to the point when the ark is opened, and with the ark open, everybody start doing it. I mean, it may well be that everybody went to be part of that. That's really interesting. But I'm absolutely sure that they would have known this little passage, and they would have done it in such a way that it wouldn't have fallen in front of them. Well, I think the next example works really closely with that example from Sota. So text 9 we've just done. Oh, my numbering's gone. Text 11 we've just done. Text 12. It's not permitted to roll the Sefer Torah, and here I'll give you what this is really talking about, from one reading to another in front of the community because of the honour of the congregation. Does anyone know what that means?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you've got readings from two different parts and you've had to take ages, rolling.
Good. When would we have readings? Right. Rosh Chodesh, special muftirs in the run-up to Pesach and just before Purim. There are certain times when you read your sort of standard trip through the year and then a special bit from over here. You need a second Sefer Torah around to do that because Mipnei Kavod Tzibor, you don't roll from one thing to the other. So in the context of text 11 and text 12, what does Kavod Tzibor mean, as it were? How would you understand Kavod Tzibor from seeing, if the only data you had was text 11 and text 12?
Smooth running of the service.
Good.
And dignity of the service.
Dignity of the service. So, so you will sometimes see me on a Shabbos. I sometimes am a bit badly behaved, but if someone's called up to Aliyah, I know that nobody here would possibly do such a thing, but they just spend a bit too long schmoozing everybody as they make their way towards the Torah, and they fancy schmoozing the rabbi, they get fairly short shrift from me. I start sort of pointing. And I'm not interested in conversation with people. Because Mipnei Kavod Tzibor, I think you have an obligation, forget being professional, it's an offence to be slovenly with time. It's not about... So there is a problem with women, which is in this bracket of Kavod Tzibor, but I don't think that it would be slovenly in terms of dress, or we'll get into it, and I think it's starting to get a bit more tricky. So this next one, I'm not going to. Well, this is the last example. let me just say something about this next one. I'm not going to do it in the text, but just so that you know what the last example of Kavod Tzibur is. It's about whether or not you can get away with different chumashim, Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy in different scrolls, or whether or not it needs to be all in one scroll. And they say no, it all needs to be in one scroll because of Kavod Tzibur. So that's the last one. And that is again slightly different. It's like, I think the sense of that is that a proper community, it's got them all in one row. Huh? You know, it's only some kind of pishy little community where it's got them sort of separately. That's the sense of that. So they're quite a sort of a range of things. Ed, sorry, your question.
Now, all these from the Talmud. This is presumably Talmud Bavli.
Yep.
Yes.
Written in Babylon when the Jews were living in a pagan society.
Yeah, some of them are older than that. Some of them are writers, probably from the land of Israel, and earlier than.
I'm just trying to think. What was, in a Muslim community...
Islam doesn't exist.
A bit like Maimonides, there was, the Muslim community didn't give women the same respect as some of the other communities.
Right, so I mean, there's certainly a very... I mean, so it's not about...
the pagan society in Babylon at the time.
Right, good. What do we know about the pagan society's treatment of women? Or consideration of the role of women in public acts of religious leadership? So what you're asking, the question, and this is the...
Were they reflecting the society?
Yeah. I mean, the thing that's on your mind is it reasonable to say that 200 years into the Common Era, if you appointed a woman in a position of religious leadership, would that necessarily mean that everybody went, well, there's clearly no man who knows what they're doing in that community at all? What a ridiculous farce of a community that is. How dishonourable for such a community. That's lurking there for you. Right. Let me leave that to stand, and we'll keep playing a little. Mendel Shapiro is a contemporary modern Orthodox rabbi. So this is one of those very rare steppings out of the sort of core of Rabbinic Judaism in the course of this journey that we're doing today. But he puts the question really well, and if you are interested in a 54-page detailed journey through this kind of stuff, I recommend what he's done enormously strongly. If you can't find it online, let me know. So Mendel Shapiro looks at Kavod Tzibur, and he asks this question, which is similar, I think, Caroline, to what I was just trying to express with you earlier. But he says, is Kavod Tzibur a durable, timeless perception that withstands shifting cultural sensitivities? In which case, if you can't do it with Kavod Tzibur, forget it, you can't do it, pack up, go home. Or is it a temporal statement of local mores and customs that is authoritative only as long as its underlying assumptions remain vital and convincing? And this is touching, Ed, the question that you're making, which is, if the underlying assumptions of goodness, if they're calling a woman, there clearly no men who know what they're doing, that's terrible. If that underlying assumption has gone, which I think we would say in the contemporary age it has, does that mean that the disqualification of women because of Kavod Tzibur also goes, or not? And we're going to kind of play with both halves of that question from the heart of the rabbinic period. So I've just stated it from the 21st century. Now let's go right back inside. This is Yosef Karo again, the author of the Shulchan Aruch. Before he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, he did a commentary called the Bet Yosef, which is hugely, hugely influential and as mainstream as it gets. So, in the Bet Yosef, Joseph Karo says, Rabbeinu Yerucham disagrees with the Rokeach, who wrote that in a city where everyone was a Kohen, one Kohen would read repeatedly. He wrote that women would read, since all go up to make up the quorum of 7, even a woman. What's the situation that the Rokeach and Rabbeinu Yerucham are trying to articulate and describing? In a city where everyone was a Kohen, one Kohen would read repeatedly. So
it's the same sort of thing as an honour of the Kohen. With one, you call out one Kohen, well, what do you do with the rest of them, sort of thing.
Okay, so my sense of this, I go on holiday to south of Spain with my father-in-law every year, and quite often you will see Haredi families who come down, and they come down sort of, a patriarch, 3 or 4 siblings, and of sort of in their sort of, I don't know, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and large numbers of children, and they take over 3 or 4 kind of villas, kosher them, and off they go and have a very nice time. Now, imagine that the patriarch was a Cohen, and that the 3 or 4 siblings, the 3 or 4 children were Cohenim. They would hit a minyan very, very quickly, and everyone would be a Cohen. So, do you read Torah publicly?
Well,
you have to. This is where it gets complicated, and this is, our Shemashim and our Gabayim, ought to know this. If you call, first day you call a Cohen, there's a Cohen in the building, you call a Cohen. If there's no Levi,
the Cohen stays.
That Cohen stays. Why can't you call another Cohen?
Because it's an offence to all the other Cohens.
No,
it's an offence to the second one called.
Yeah.
Because
I'm not good enough to be first.
No. It's more technical than that. The offence to the second Cohen called is that everyone will think that the second Cohen is not a Cohen, but instead
a
Levi. Right, sorry to the Levis here. My grandfather, Rabbi Shalom, among them. Right? You can't call a different Cohen. You have to call the same Cohen. So they just stay there. Okay, so here comes the next question. Okay, so thank you, Cohen. You've now had your first Aliyah and you've had your second Aliyah. Can you call a Cohen for Shlishi? 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th, which are the Aliyot which are for Shleppers, right? By the way, Kohanim are Levi'im. Do you know that? Right? They're all descendants of Mr. Levi. They're all members of the tribe of Levi. They are a subset of the tribe of Levi. So that's why you can call a Cohen as a Levi, because he is. He's a subset of that larger set. But he ain't a Yisrael. And you can't call a Cohen as a Yisrael. Forget it. So, what do? You got a problem. The Rokeach says, I know it's not ideal, but what can we do? We're not calling another Cohen, but let's just keep calling this sort of same person. Bimkom Kohen, he goes again, Bimkom Kohen, he goes again, Bimkom Kohen, he goes again. But the Rabbeinu Yerucham says, well,
why is it Bimkom Kohen if it's Kohen?
I don't even know how you would do it. You're quite right, Ed. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, do you do something truly odd, or do you do something quite truly odd? Do you call a woman? Why do you think you might call a woman? Well, going back to that original Tosefta, going back to that original Brighter that we saw in the Talmud, it says that women can, but don't. So maybe that means that when you're in this kind of lose-lose situation, it's possible. Do you understand that sort of text? Now, to me, that text is a disagreement about what you do with this sort of strange situation where you've got a bunch of Kohanim on holiday in the south of Spain. But really, it's about whether or not Kavod Tzibur means durable, timeless, and you don't, or you just work out what's going on in this particular time. Do you analyse the realities of the situation? This next text. You know what? Let me just skip. Let me do 17, and I'll come back and do 16 because 17 I think is also really interesting. So Rav Ben Sion Abba Shaul, 20th century. If I call him modern Orthodox, that's not right. I mean, he looked Haredi. He was a very, very important figure in Orthodoxy, but a liberal figure within ultra-Orthodoxy. So he's saying this. This is text number 17. I'll come back to 16 in a second. The thing needs an investigation. He's not committing himself. Because if women never went up, what would be the purpose of saying, all go up to meet the Quorum of 7? He's got a good point. I mean, the original text could have said, all men make up the Quorum of 7. And by the way, women don't. Could have said that. But it didn't. It said, all go up, including women, but. Therefore it seems that in a place where there is no worry about the honour of the community, for example in a place where all the governors are members of one family, and the woman is the head of house, and all the rest of the men are her sons and grandsons, in that case there would be no lessening of the honour of the community were she to go up, and it would be fine to include her to go up to the Torah, but the thing needs investigation. Woof, that's extraordinary. Very, 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 very interesting. What he says is, you know, we're off on holiday in Spain again, and the grandfather has passed away, the grandmother's there, and boy, this woman ruled the roost. Matriarch, matriarch, matriarch. Everybody else is mishpacha. And what's Rav Ben Zion Abishur is saying is that because in a social reality she's the top person, there's no affront to the honour of that family. If you honour its matriarch, you can honour the matriarch. Very interesting. Just one second. That only makes sense if Kavod Tzibor is the social reality, right? I mean, if it is just a label which explains what, you know, which doesn't explain. If it is just the thing which says don't do it because of X, it doesn't make, you know, that doesn't make sense at all. Sorry.
Yeah, but the example here seems to indicate that it's a social reality in extremis.
Right. Good. So two things to say before he starts spinning, because, you know, I'm sure he does every time a rabbi like me teaches a text like this. The context of the conversation we have, and he would certainly not countenance this. I mean, I'm sure. One is he is prevaricating. He's not setting it out clearly. And the other one is that what he's talking about is the one-off. A, the one-off social reality, and B, and this is something which there is quite a lot of halachic discussion about, can you have one? Can you have two? Can you have three? Yes, but certainly not four. And places like Shira Chadashah, which is a semi-egalitarian Orthodox environment, I forget exactly how they do what they do, but it's based on this Mendel Shapiro piece. Yeah. You can't have all women, you know. I think it actually has to be a minority of women. It can't be a majority of women, because it kind of destabilizes that in some kind of a way. But yeah.
But I think that, I mean, what he's saying here is, yes, it's a weird situation. How often is this ever going to happen? If it's ever happened, but what he's saying here is, if the blokes don't mind, or actually quite like it, the halacha has no problem with it. It seems to me that's what he's saying.
Right.
The only don't mind or quite like it.
Right. I don't think that you can say that this is about what people like. I think he's saying, if in some objective sense it's not dishonourable.
All right, okay. But it's about what the men are perceiving. It's not this objective halachic thing.
I don't think it's up to. I don't know. I'm not saying that.
But where does the Kavod Tzibor reside then? In the Tzibor.
Right, but the Tzibor is made up. The Tzibor is made up of men and women.
Precisely. Well, yeah, but okay, it's in the men and women. So
yes.
What they consider to be Kavod to them or not?
No, I think
the daughters-in-law.
I think he's not. I think he's
outside. It has to reside within the Tzibor.
I don't think he believes in a public vote.
No, I don't mean the public vote. I'm not talking about voting.
It's not up to people. I don't think he is as interested in what everybody around thinks. I think he's making the people in the room. I think he's making a kind of a statement, regardless of what people in the room think.
But what's the Tzibor then? Is the people who are there?
Yeah, he's less interested in what they think and what they personally feel. He's more interested in some kind of more objective reality. I think he thinks that to call a matriarch is not an offence. Let me keep moving. I think we're disagreeing about something quite fine. We might come back to it.
Frida wants to say something.
Isn't that more subjective, not more objective?
Yeah, I agree.
No, I think what Angela is suggesting, that people get to decide how their honour is to be held. I think that's subjective.
Which means anything, the honour of the congregation must mean the honour of the congregation, and that, in my view, is something that I'm a traditionalist and so on. That is something that changes over time.
I think it's certainly. I mean, I would agree that it can change over time. I don't think that. I think that Rav Ben-Sion thinks it's not dishonourable, and whatever anybody else in the room thinks, he doesn't care about. I think he just thinks it's not dishonourable. Let me keep moving. And by that I mean I'm just going up one, so I'm going to do text 16.
Rabbi Jeremy, just
Yeah.
a very quick question. In the text, it doesn't say like the scenario where the grandpa's passed away. Does he mean it so in that context, or could it be just that they as a family choose, well, it'd be nice for grandpa to do it, or is it just assumes that the men are not?
When I said that the grandfather passed away, it was like the men is the head of the house. It's not to do with there aren't enough men who can do it.
Oh, right.
Yes.
The there aren't enough men who can do it text is 16. So let's do that. So this is the Rivets again. These are really kind of core central legal thinkers.
Sorry, where are you now?
16, just one up from just gone back one.
Okay.
It seems that it is possible to call a woman. And the first part of the Tosefta and Megillah that says that all go up to make up the minyan of 7, even women, even children, is talking about the time when there are not 7 men who are expert readers, and there is an expert woman, which could be and or, right? They can't do it without her. Now this is closer read to the situation that you were asking about before. So the Rivets knows that at the time, you come up, you read your own bit, and then you go back down. No balkore. And what he's saying is that you've got 10 men who are around making up the minyan, but they can't read from the Torah. There's a woman who's there and she can read from the Torah. What do? Do you bluff one of the men through, or do you get the woman to come up and do it? What he says is, you get the woman to come up and do it. Mm-hmm. Now that's interesting, and I think that what it kind of suggests is that the question that Ed was putting before, which is, does Kavod Tzibor, in the context of calling women to the Torah, mean that if you're calling a woman, that is a demonstration that there's no man around who can do it properly, and that is a sort of a bad, sour reflection, a dishonourable reflection on that particular community, and therefore don't call up a woman, because if you do call up a woman, that's what everyone will think about the community. The answer to that question is, according to the Rivets, yes. Right? The Rivets is thinking about a time where if you call a woman to do it, it has to be that there are no men around who can do it. Because it's, quote, man's work.
Again, it's an extreme condition.
It's an extreme condition, but what's interesting to me is less it's less the specific of that extreme condition, but what is Kavod Tzibor? Right?
It's a big question, isn't it?
It's a very big question. It's the key question.
That's what we're looking at.
It's the key question. And what I'm suggesting is that what the Rivets are saying is that Kavod Tzibor is it in some kind of objective sense measured by the societal thing that is going around a dishonourable thing? I can't remember who taught this to me. Do you spell Kavod Tzibor with a capital C and a capital H? Capital K and a capital A, or with a small case C and a small case H, right? Is it the honour of the community, or is it the honour of the community? In other words, and I think, from these kinds of texts, you can see that it's about the realities of what is happening in that community, given its milieu.
That is assuming that a society at that time had women who were expert readers.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Very interesting.
Where did they learn?
You know what? I tell you who's on my mind. Your daughter,
Yeah.
who never had a chance to do a Torah growing up, but got kind of taught it by a father who wanted his daughter to know how to do it. There are these strange whispers about Rashi's daughters. By the way, there are no texts. I mean, but David Galinkin, who we'll encounter, by the way, later, has been looking for this famous sort of text about Rashi's daughters. He can't find it, by which it means it doesn't exist. But and it's possible, I think, to imagine, a learned man who has 5 daughters, no sons, and he desperately wants his daughters to know how to do this, so that you end up with this situation where you get a daughter who knows how to do this kind of stuff. I don't think there's this sort of... it's not like Drisha, right? It's not like that there's this kollel, yeshiva for women that are kind of training up women for who knows what. But I think that you can imagine that within a family you might get someone here and someone there.
Well, this particular example, if there was an expert child, a male child, would he have preference over...
Great question. Well, that begets this question. And it's a text that I'm going to be sharing next week. Who is more dishonouring, the woman or the child? The text that I'm going to use next week is a 20th century American woman who notes that women often get put in the same category as the slave and the child. That comes quite frequently. And says you can free a slave, the child grows up, it's only the woman who is forever cast in this diminutive category with no possibility of escape. I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting that it says everyone goes up to read from the Torah, even a child, even a woman. That order there would suggest that it's less dishonouring for a child, or that the fact that a woman makes it into that list is even more striking. Everyone goes up. Even a woman, even a child would suggest that the women are the sort of the outer ring of a Venn diagram, as it were.
It's not dishonorable for men if you don't think the woman is less important than you.
Okay. You've asked a very modern question, which is it dishonourable for a community to treat women in that way? I don't want to suggest that a community that doesn't give aliyot to women is because here we are. But I understand the question, and I will give you an answer to that question before we
Jeremy, that's precisely what happened at Shira Chadasha when you referred to the Bible, which the men said, let's flip this over. It is very insulting to us to suggest that we would be insulted by women having aliyot. We're modern men, we're not threatened by a woman who can read from the Torah, we're not threatened by a woman who can read from the Torah. And that actually was the argument that clinched it when they went,
right.
when they, as it were, pushed the halakha as far as it would go.
I promise I'm coming back to that.
Okay.
So let me just do one vote against what I've just said. Right, so texts, as it were, 15, 16 and 17 are all in favour of Kavod Tzibor being this sociological reality. That if the sociological reality suggests that it wouldn't be dishonourable in some objective sense, the prohibition sort of softens, not to put it more strongly than that. But let me give you the counter voice, and this is an important counter voice. So the Bet Chadash, or known as the Bach, is Joel Sirkis, who is one of the people who is printed on the page of the Shulchan Aruch. So this is a considerable person, and he's going to come at this from the other side.
And the date is also 17th century.
It's post. It's all I can do is post Shulchan Aruch. Sorry, I should have looked it up. But he's therefore an achara, but a very significant figure. The matter is simple. When the wise make an alteration, and we saw that in the Brighton when we looked at the original text in the Talmud, not in the Tzefta, but if the wise say don't do something and worry about the honour of the congregation, it is not in the hands of the congregation to forgo their honour. So this is that's that conversation that Angela, you and I were having, which is can a community say we forgo our honour and therefore the thing, as it were, it's not up to the congregation. If I was wrong, right, if this wasn't correct, every alteration by the wise would be lost, and that would be horrid. Because you'd get wise rabbis saying, do X, and actually Judaism used to work like this. You would send off a letter to Baghdad, and the Gaonim in Baghdad would send back a letter saying, this is what you should do, and you do it. You don't sit there and go, well, should we do that or not? I mean, I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, but that's much more of a Reform perspective, which is, within classic Reform doctrine, I am responsible for deciding whether or not I should do something or not. That is radically modern and not within mainstream rabbinic thought, which is that if you don't know what to do, or even if you think you know what to do, you ask a rabbi and the rabbi tells you, and what the rabbi tells you is what Judaism says. Wouldn't it be lovely if everything worked like that? No, by the way, just in case, but never mind. Okay, that would be horrid. Moreover, it would split Israel into factions. This community would forego, this community wouldn't. Right? You'd get a break up in the Achdut of Yisrael. For sure, you can't forego and uproot alterations of the wise. Who do you think you are? Pisha? Really? It's not in your grasp. Then he says this. The term Kavod HaTzibur does not refer to the dignity of the congregants. It's not about you. I have certain sympathy for the first part of that sentence. The next part of the sentence I'm not so convinced about at all. Rather, it is not dignified. I should just explain. This is not talking. This bit that I just started with the term Kavod HaTzibur is talking about a shliach tzibur who doesn't have a beard. There's a big thing about rabbis who don't have beards, pages and pages and pages. But can you get a chazan who doesn't have a beard? If you ask Jason, he'd say yes, no. Sorry, thank you. I'm preparing here all week. It's not dignified for the congregation to be represented by an unbearded prayer leader, and commended before the. It's not appropriate for the congregation to be commended before the Almighty by a person lacking an imposing appearance. They just assume that. That beard. By the way, literally, do you know the Hebrew word for beard? Zaken literally means wise or old. By the way, correct. Correct. Now, wouldn't that be an upturn for this as a
bearded lady may read?
Unless the can't. Again, what does society say about people who are bearded and people who aren't bearded? And Jewish communities where the beard is omnipresent, what is their relationship with changing historical reality? Don't like it. Don't go in for it. They wear the same thing that they've been wearing for a while because they're not moving with the times, quite proudly. Because they think moving with the times is a bad thing. But that is a debate within Judaism between what would be ultra-Orthodox rejectionist of modernity and everybody from modern Orthodox, as it were, across. Right? So having said that, you can't, it's not up to you to decide, we like his voice. He's got such a lovely voice. The guy with the beard, he takes forever, and boy, he just can't hit that top C. Right? By the way, interesting. What happens to your voice at the point at which you start growing a beard? Very, very, very interesting. The stories that we know of the castrati within the Catholic Church, all that kind of stuff, right? Why not? But similarly, a woman may not read publicly because it is a ganai to the congregation. Ganai, disgrace. And I left it in the Hebrew because I think some people kind of, have that as a sort of word that they grew up with. But a ganai is a disgusting thing. It is the opposite of kavod. So, who is the Bach? Do we call him a misogynist? I don't know. I don't really like those kinds of labels. I'm not really keen on them. But he's saying two things. One is, it's not about the community, it's about God. And he says, trust me, I'm a rabbi. God doesn't like it. Now, is he talking for himself, or has he managed to actually work out what God wants? I don't know, but, And the other thing he's saying is that it's been said, the wise have decided Pisha, keep out. Don't get involved. It's not your call. It's not up to you. So when we were having that little backwards and forwards about who gets to decide, I think actually, Ben Sion Abba Shaul is kind of with the Bach in the way in which it should be analysed, although he comes to a different conclusion.
Who decides who is the wise?
Right. So what you're now asking is a hugely important question, which is who is in charge of stating the will of God? Because the last time we got it clearly was 3,300 years ago. And you hunt through a verse like Hakel, the very first text that we did, and we're no further forward. So we enter into the journey which is Rabbinic Judaism, of something being passed down generation by generation by generation. And I don't overwrite my role in this. I know how small I am compared to those who've gone before. But, I'm a part of that. But I ought to have a great deal of humility and a great deal of respect for people who've gone earlier. Give you one really interesting example. When I arrived at the shul, we had a logo that was designed by Abraham Games, who was one of the greatest graphic designers of the 20th century. There's an exhibition of his art at the Jewish Museum at the moment. And he did the design in 1964, and he was 20 years ahead of his time. I think that design would have looked fabulous in 1984. But by 43 years later, it looked 20 years out of date. And we were having a conversation about changing it. And I thought, you know what, I'll ring up his son. And we have a Games in the synagogue who is a relative. And I got the phone number and I rang him up and I said, did you know your father well enough to answer this question? If he did a logo, did he think that was it forever? Or did he think as he did a logo, that will do him for a bit, and I hope and I expect that as time moves forward, they will indeed render my logo old and move onwards. Was he that? What kind of a person was he? To which the son, and I wish I could have asked Abraham Games, but Alav Shalom, he'd passed away before, to which the son said, don't change. No, he didn't like everything being changed, but I don't even know if that was true. My experience is that sometimes people who are creative feel what they're saying has to fit forever, and sometimes people feel not. And here's the really big one. The children of those foundational people, regardless of the attitude of the foundational person, feel an obligation to preserve, I don't want to say inaspect, that's too pejorative, to preserve what was set up before. And I am very aware of that dynamic as it manifests itself in New London Synagogue, both in terms of sort of the genetic inheritors of Rabbi Jacobs. I have a tremendous amount of respect and time for Ivor. And also a certain kind of tranche of the membership, who I also have a great deal of time for, who feel the responsibility to preserve the inheritance that they have. So it's a really difficult question to get into. One thing that just want to add to that is this question. It's called Das Torah, and it has to be pronounced with the Yiddish inflection of Das Torah as Dat Torah. There are a group of rabbis who claim and who and other people who give it to them a perfection that verges on the prophetic. They are just so knowledgeable that what they say is so perfect that it can't be broached by anybody. And I reject that as a true thing within Judaism. I think it's bad. I think it is dangerous. I think it is unhalachic, and I think it's wrong. But there are people who bandy around that kind of thing. Well, so-and-so said something. That's it. Pens down, you're off. But I don't think that's really what Judaism is ever about. Louis was, Alav Shalom, was so interesting because in his research and in his writing, he was full of the progression and the unfolding and the changing and the response to the social valence of the time. That was his PhD thesis. And everything else, the tree of life and theology and the responsa and everything. But in practice, he wasn't any of those things. In terms of here, he didn't like change. He liked it the way that he liked it.
What I don't understand about this, I understand the importance of sort of understanding, learning to know where we are, sort of why we are where we are, and so on. But all these arguments kind of leave us still a few hundred years ago, and I thought the whole point about Masorti was that it develops the argument further, building on these principles, and then, as I understand it, the whole nature of it and the way that it's different from reform, say, is because there is then this tension between that continuing argument and the tradition. But this sort of, to me, kind of leaves off the argument a few hundred years ago.
Okay, so A, that's my text 19. I'm doing exactly what you are suggesting that I should be doing. But before we do it, the point that I'm making is not we can do whatever we want. The point that I'm making is that when I say the halacha of the question of the role of women, understood through history, applied to today, or understood particularly through the kind of the main period of rabbinic work, means that I don't know what halacha should be today. Or means that it's not obvious to me that today women shouldn't have an aliyah because of kavod tzibur. Means that what I'm saying is that I don't think that on this issue of kavod tzibur, and by the way, I will say something different next week when I'm looking at the question of whether or not women can lead services. I don't think that you can say with complete confidence, I've looked at the halacha, and the halacha says that women can't have an aliyah. I don't think you can do that in the context of a 21st century community. I think that would be to underappreciate the nuances that have always existed on this journey around these questions, going right the way back to that question, Caroline, that you asked, which is, what does it mean? Does it mean, timeless, or does it mean set in the current, I'm locating this now, knowing that time is unfolding, and this is the great, and that I think is why it's worth studying it. Because what I'm not going to turn around and say is something radically modern. I'm going to put myself in a unfolding of a narrative. Now, certainly you could disagree with that, but I think I'm right. Daniel.
When you try to locate us in that narrative, you talk about generally in the 21st century. Are you also locating this shul as a Masorti synagogue compared to Mea Shearim, where they probably still are?
Good.
And even a united synagogue in London, which is, it would be a kavod hatzibur in that community to have a woman. So are you talking about a specific community?
Really interesting question. Do I think that in the 21st century, women should be called to read from the Torah in Har Nof, where my brother lives? No. Because it would right. Well, A, they'd have a fit, but B,
no, it doesn't fit.
It doesn't fit. But also the way in which the role of men and women is understood in Har Nof is that if you were calling a woman, it had to mean that there weren't any men who could do it properly. And that's the only reason why, because women are so much private and in the homes and powerful in their own ways, but not engaging publicly. I'm absolutely saying that what should be done religiously should be responsive to the surrounding sociological realities. I'm absolutely saying that.
And can't you apply that to text 18 in that he says at the start, it's not for the congregation to choose to forego their honour. So it's not like you're getting a bunch of men going, you know what, I'm prepared to be dishonoured to let this woman participate, because if they aren't losing their honour, because the world has changed and the role of women has changed, so it's not dishonourable.
Right. Okay.
In today's context.
I agree with that entirely, as does David Galinkin, which is good news for you. Rabbi David Galinkin is the senior halachic scholar of the Israeli Masorti movement, and has written very, very extensively on this. And this is an English summary of a much, much longer piece of Hebrew. And this, Frida, is my response to your question, which is, when you're bringing this up to date. And just to sort of wave the flag, as I think I said that I was going to, this is my one non-mainstream voice other than the Mendel Shapiro thing, and he was only included just to sort of put the question, I think, really beautifully. So this is Galinkin. If a woman is only excluded from reading the Torah because of Kavod Tzibor, may the congregation relinquish its honour and allow a woman to read. Some authorities say that a congregation can relinquish its honour, while others say no. Right? Among the people who say no is the Bet Chadash. That's the text at the top of the page. But in most cases, we have found most of the authorities rule that a congregation may relinquish its honour. This would therefore hold true in our case as well. In other words, the majority of people who've asked the question, can a community itself, so this is to get back actually to your question, can they sort of sit around and take a vote, as it were? The answer is most people think that they can. However, and this is to me really important, even if we were to rule the opposite, in other words, a congregation can't give up on its honour, so even if you were to agree with the above, as it were, there is no need in this case for the congregation to relinquish its honour. In the late Talmudic period, the disgrace to the congregation stemmed from the fact that men learned how to read from the Torah and women did not, and thus it would disgrace the men to have a woman read in public. Today, of course, this is no longer the case. That gets Ed to the point that you were making. In other words, says Galinkin, it's only about what's going on in the society. That's all that it means. And you don't have to say, oh, I am mochel my kavod, I will yield to this, because there's just no genai that happens in 2014, 5775. It just doesn't apply. The whole thing doesn't sort of get into a place where you have to ask the men if they're prepared to let the women, if they're prepared to let the women suggest that they are useless. The question doesn't exist.
When was this written?
80s or 90s, probably 90s.
But this is talking about having a woman laning, and before we were talking about giving a woman an aliyah, and I think they're two quite separate things.
Right. You are right, but for Galinkin it doesn't make a difference.
I would have thought that the honour of the community would make a difference.
For Galinkin, and this is to do with the fact that as the halacha was forged, there was no difference between having an aliyah and reading. There is still no difference between having an aliyah and reading.
One of the big problems of having a woman reading is that a man's voice carries much better, it's much easier to hear.
Okay. I mean,
it is a practical difficulty.
Thank you. This only works if we kind of allow people to express how they feel. I mean, I hear what you're saying. Sorry, Brian. Yes.
So when does custom become halacha?
That's the big question.
When does custom become halacha? So this was my last text. I know that we've gone a couple of times out of order, but I think in general, so this is. I could have brought this from one of umpteen different places in the Talmud. There is, and this is where it gets so complicated, and this is where I feel that Masorti is correct Judaism. I don't feel that Masorti is. We looked at Judaism, we didn't like it, so we changed it. I don't feel that. I feel that Masorti is actually really trying to penetrate to the very heart of the halachic system, as it has always been. Because there is a halachic category of puk chazi, which means go out and check what people are doing. In other words, the halacha itself is involved in looking at what's going on around. So if you've got a group of people who have always been doing X, you should probably leave them doing X. But B, and in disagreement with that, if the thing that's going on around this thing has rendered this thing such an odd fit as to be truly strange, then you allow what's going on outside to penetrate into that. Now, quite what does that mean about calling women to the Torah at New London Synagogue? I'm aware that those are two mutually exclusive analyses. But the point is that halacha doesn't float in the air. Lo b'shamayim here, it's not in heaven. It has been given to human beings to carry and to do their best with. What do I think we've done? I think we've looked at the way in which Torah reading in general is a good case study for how do you juggle realities of people and their religious convictions and their levels of comfort and our wish to honour them and our fear of disgracing them or the community or Torah or God. So it's a jumble in general. And in the context of that, this term Kavod Tzibor, which 1800 plus years ago meant if you called a woman to do it, it must have meant that a man couldn't and therefore it's bad. It means today, look at what's going on around the community, I think. And I have to say, I don't like the vote thing.
You don't like what?
I don't like the vote thing. I'm with Galinkin, I'm with the Bach, in the sense that what you don't do is you don't ask everybody how they feel about it. And I'm entirely aware, and Stephen and actually Julian particularly knows, I didn't like it when it went that way in the Constitution when we reconstituted ourselves in general, because I don't think that that's what should be happening. I think that the question for us at New London Synagogue is, how do we relate to this phrase, Kavod Tzibor? And one last piece about discomfort. And maybe, Alan, to come back to what you were saying about the head and the heart, and gosh, what will it look like? What will it feel like? And will I feel this is still my community? And what if they ask me and I come? And by the way, we had that 10 days ago, right? It's going to be it will be discomforting. Maybe for as long as an entire generation, right? Maybe there needs to be a whole Dor HaMidbar, right? When one generation dies and the next generation comes up and they grow up with this kind of stuff. How do I relate to those things as a congregational rabbi ambivalently? On the one hand, a community full of people who feel uncomfortable, that makes me feel very nervous. How are you feeling about that? But on the other hand, it ain't about comfort. It's just not, and this idea that, we should have a religious community that acts as a service provider to our own levels of comfort worries me deeply. Because actually that's not Jewish. That's not, as I understand Judaism, Masorti Judaism. In some ways, and I'm aware that a lot of people in Reform do things that are extremely discomforting to them because of what they believe to do. But that's much more of a, do I think I should be doing this or not? Am I comfortable with it? Do I want this or do I not want this? So, I'm not there. So I have a concern about this community making the decision in the way in which constitutionally we are obliged to make that decision. Because I think that if the issue is Kavod Tzibor, and it is, and if Kavod Tzibor means what it meant, and it don't mean that anymore, whether we're comfortable or not is not really the issue. Any freedom? Ed?
One of the things that Rabbi Jeremy used to express was it's a sophisticated interpretation of Revelation of being what decisions the Jewish people as a whole took century after century, and how things were dropped and things were accepted, and of all the conflicting ideas, some were dropped completely and some became part of halakha.
Right.
And that, to him, was revelation.
The
Jewish people created revelation. The Jewish people decided as a whole, it wasn't one community or another, it was the people over the centuries.
That's very true, and that's got something to say about how quickly can the pace of change work. It's got something to say about how many people have you got. You know, as my brother in Harnof says to me, you know, and how many people in your community, you know, daven 3 times a day and read a Blatta Gemara and you know, and this, that, and the other. To which my answer is, we are a weaker community than he is. Who survives? If you know, I mean, was anyone here at the Samaritans talk last week? No. You know, if you're no longer around in numbers, then you're not a player anymore. That's a problem also. So I'm aware of those kinds of things.
Couldn't you use that to argue? Therefore, if we are lucky enough to have some women in our community that are able to do these things, that we should harness that. We're not a community where everybody is able to go and read from the Torah. So, in terms of honouring our community, should we take, you know, honour everybody who has that knowledge, whether they're male or female?
I mean, part of the problem is that you can play any argument both ways against itself. But I mean, you know, I hear what you're saying. So you know what? Bye if you're watching on film, and thank you very much if you're recording. I'm not going anywhere. We are sort of, you know, we'll formally pause. If anybody wants to ask any questions or stay around or engage, you know, very happy to. But that will do for that.